this night, you will not go astray. Though shadows fall, still the stars find their way. Awaken from a quiet sleep, hear the whispering of the wind. Awaken as the silence grows in a solitude of the night. Darkness spreads throughout the land, and your weary eyes open silently. Sunsets have forsaken all the most far-off horizons. Nightmares come when shadows grow. Eyes close and heartbeat slow. Fear not this night, you will not go astray. Though shadows fall, still the stars find their way. Fear not this night, you will not go astray. Though shadows fall, still the stars find their way. Who needs the light? Fear not this night.
Hi, guys, and surprise! So, back before episode 3, when the trailer for Living World episode 3 came out, we included a short version of a redo of Fear Not This Night by McLean. You guys really loved it, so McLean got to work fleshing that out, and it is ready now. You guys just got to hear it for the very, very first time, and by the end of this episode, it will be available for all of you on our SoundCloud. So keep an eye out for that. But for now, we have a couple things. I'm going to talk to a couple of our devs. First, though, we have one little thing here. If you guys remember the blue Quaggan mug from the holidays, For Fans by Fans made a little pink version. Here's your blue version's friend. And that is coming to their website soon. This thing is enormous. I can put so much coffee in this. And I'm so happy about that. But yeah, we have the little pink Quaggan girl now with her little hair bow.
I don't want to think I have that bow stuck on.
Just don't think about it too hard. Okay. It's fine. And then you'll still be happy.
It's glue.
I can still drink out of it, so I'm happy. So, all right.
It's very cute.
So that's our new For Fans by Fans mug that I kind of dig. And today we're going to be talking about the narrative process, getting the story from our heads into the live game for you guys. And I'll let our two dev guests introduce themselves, let us know who you are and what you do here.
Okay. I'm Eve Eschenbacher. I am the voiceover lead.
I'm Tom Abernathy, and I'm unsure which camera to look at, that one. And I'm the studio narrative director.
This is you guys. This is me. That one's all three of us.
Right, got it. Okay. Thank
you. We're doing it live. A quick note, if you guys have questions, just drop them into chat, and we're going to try to answer a few of those at the end today. So, all right, well, let's get started. Let's kind of talk about how the process goes from beginning to end. Where do you start when all of this begins to get it into the game? Tom,
Shall I begin?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll let you go
Okay.
ahead.
So yeah, because obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but we have to write things. We have to make a story before we can record a story. Um, what's interesting about our process here is that because we put out content every 2.5 or 3 months, there's an assembly line aspect to what we do. That's not necessarily true in all kinds of games, and so we're constantly able to refine our process and make adjustments each new episode, and so that's awesome, and we're constantly trying to do that. So the process that I'll describe is mostly what we're doing now. To some small degree, it's what we are intending to do as we continue to refine. But basically, the way that it happens is we start breaking a season of content. Breaking means sitting down and talking about what we think the season should be about. That group involves various people, but usually the constants right now are me and Jessica Price, who's story editor for Guild Wars 2, and Lindsay Murdoch, who is the content lead designer, and Jason Vanderberg, who's design director, and Mike Z is in there, and various other folks maybe as well. And when we start talking about story, we actually really like we're breaking stuff right now where we're talking about themes. We begin with themes. What do we want it to be about in the sense of meaning, right? Because narrative in games, I think the role of it is we're the discipline that answers the why questions. We're the discipline that imbues the experience with meaning. The example that I like to give is that if somebody gives you a white box on a screen and a sphere which you can sort of throw against things or the floor or whatever and stuff, that could be fun for a while. But if I say to you, okay, now you're LeBron James and it's Game 7 of the NBA Finals and there's 2/3 of a second left and you're at the free throw line and the Cavs are down by 1.
I am suddenly so stressed out.
Right. And there's seven, 1,000 people or whatever screaming their heads off and waving. Sure. I mean, obviously, suddenly that context changes everything about that experience, right? And that's our job, is to provide that kind of meaning. So we start out talking about that stuff. Each season at this point has its own set of themes we're dealing with. Each season has its own set of character arcs. That's the next thing that we bring in is what's going on with the characters. We believe strongly that all story comes from character. So what's going on with them? How are they evolving? One of our big focuses this year has been to have characters evolve over time, to have things that happen to them and the emotional effects of that stuff be persistent. And we talked last time we were here about a bit about Timey for episode 1 and how we're doing that with her, and she's certainly not the only character that's true of. We'll sort of get all that stuff down, and once we understand what the needs are we're trying to fill, then we'll start to say, okay, so what needs to happen plot-wise for these things? And there are lots of questions that come in there. Are there certain areas of the world that we want to go to for the first time, or do we want to go back to? Where do we think we're going in a longer-term sense? And we will come out of that process with a reasonably strong sort of high-level bullet point outline of what's going to happen, high view, 35,000-foot view of the season. Mm-hmm. And then we bring more designers into the room. Obviously, Lindsay's been there and Jason the whole time, but we bring more designers in and we start saying, okay, talk to us about what your ideas of gameplay you'd like to do are and how we can make those things work together, right? Because, we can't talk about, if I'm a gameplay designer and you turn to me and say, okay, this season, Aurene is, she's kind of a teenage dragon now and she's going through teenage stuff, right? And I'll be like, okay, how do I make gameplay out of that? That's a challenge for sure. So it's a sort of ongoing collaboration in that way, and designers will come up with all sorts of awesome stuff until they basically have their pitch presentation for what they think the gameplay of all that should be. And they, Jason now and Lindsay are having them make these amazing presentations, PowerPoints, where they chart the intensity both of gameplay and of narrative across each chapter and all this kind of stuff. And it's really cool. And that's a fairly new addition to the process.
Really?
Yeah, Jason has brought that in. And
I'm going to want to talk about that at some point in a future episode.
okay, cool.
Because that's amazing.
Right, and then so now everybody sort of has a large sense of what we're doing, broad
Right.
strokes. And then we have 3 episode content teams, of course, and various writers assigned to work with them on various aspects of each episode, and then people start breaking it down. I mean, you go from the macrocosmical level to the microcosmical, right?
Right.
And they start breaking it down in terms of, okay, what's the actual outline of the chapters in the thing? What's the outline within the chapters? What's going to happen plot-wise, gameplay-wise, character-wise, all of that stuff. And when you've got a pretty good outline of all that, the designer can begin to do their work in earnest, and the writer can begin to do their work in earnest, and they sit near each other, and they, will sit together and like play through what the designer's building, and or read through what the writer is doing, and that's all. It's at its best. That's a really like intimate collaboration that really knits the gameplay and the narrative together, and it's important to do that because if they're not working together, if they're in any way not synced up, much less at loggerheads with each other, then you're not going to get a very fun experience.
It's not
gonna
as
have
its
a good
best.
meaning. Yeah, that's right.
So that's when you start iterating and figuring out what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Yep.
We haven't even gotten down
I know.
to the high part.
I know,
Right, you
this
can't
is-
talk yet because we're not to
And
VO
this
yet.
is like the very, very, very beginning. I mean, this is just, and it already sounds
It's
like
true.
such a huge process.
Well, yeah, it's months out, and
Yeah.
and for people who maybe have some knowledge of how the TV production process works, which is somewhat analogous to what we do, but because we have to build everything that you see, right? In a virtual world, every visual asset has to be created from scratch. So a TV show can actually get made in a much shorter amount of time. They'll start breaking story for a season of a television show if it's a normal one that starts in the fall. They'll start like they take their hiatus before April, and then around late spring they'll get back together, and the writers will spend about 3 weeks doing their version of what I just talked about, breaking the story, and then they'll go away and they'll all start writing episodes, and those episodes, the outlines for them and sort of the locations will get handed out to groups of craftspeople who make sets or design costumes or that kind of thing. But it doesn't take them as long. It takes them a while, but it doesn't take them as long. For us, the process of going from the beginning of dealing with a single episode in earnest to that episode being released is probably it's 6 months
6 8?
at least, I would say. And each of our episode teams, there are 3 of them. Generally, we have done 6 episode seasons, so they're each responsible for 2 historically. Not making any promises for the future. It's just a long process. And from the narrative point of view, then what we'll do is as the writer iterates in response to the collaboration with the designer, in response to feedback that they're getting from Lindsay and from Jason, we will pretty quickly sit at a table with a bunch of narrative team folks and whoever wants to participate, and we'll read those things out loud, because this is not fiction writing. This is not writing for the written word. It's writing for people speaking out loud. It's dramatic writing that's meant to be spoken, right? So we want to get it up on its feet, so to speak, as quickly as possible so that we can hear how it sounds. And we actually end up doing that several times through the process. The first few times we're doing it primarily for writing purposes. But once the designers are basically pencils down and mostly they've done the iteration they're going to do, and we sort of settle a script, at that point it goes off to editing and they go through it, and then we begin the VO process.
That's where I grab hold of
Yay.
it, and that's the last.
Tell me about table reads. Like
Okay.
And
that's-
casting too. Talk about
Oh
casting.
yeah.
Yes.
So casting, roughly 2 to 3 weeks before the episode is supposed to be passed off to editing, I sit down with the writers and the designers and say, okay, what have you created? What do we need?
What have you done?
Yes.
Yes.
Sometimes that. So I get a list
Cast of
of all
thousands.
of the named actor or all of the named characters we need to bring back in. We've got the PCs on there, and then how many generics they need. And sometimes I have to, dash their dreams and say, no, I'm sorry, we can't have 20 different, human character, 20 different human voices. I can give you, 10 or 12.
Because the SAG contract says that each actor can do 3 voices.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, okay.
If we want them to do more than that, we have to pay them extra. But the problem is, for example, if you're in a place, let's say, where there are lots of humans, like Alona lately, right? You're potentially asking an actor to come in and give you 3 different human voices, which some actors can do, and you'll never know it's the same one.
Yeah.
But not that many of them can.
Yeah.
That's a tough order. It's easier when when they're coming in, they have one human voice, one Char voice, one Asura voice, different kinds of processing that'll go on and change it. And it'll be easier to sort of not let the player know that that's the same actor doing all 3.
Right.
And you can put them in different places on the map sometimes. But, for episode 3, we had 27 different actors come in. The 10 player characters plus 17 more people. So it's like throwing a giant party every couple of months. It requires a lot of coordination.
Well, the 10 player characters especially, that's really unusual, and it's an enormous amount of overhead. I love that we do it because I think the value of the players is huge, but I'm not going to lie, it's a big chunk of work to make happen.
Yeah.
So put it all up on the board. We assign voice roles out, get everybody listed. Off to back to the writers. And sometimes I've had to say, like, I'm sorry, I can't give you, I can't give you this, but
It's
I can
nice
give you
that you
this.
want
and you need to pair it.
150 human male voices.
Or 6.
Yeah.
I want 6 generic in this place, and Eve will say, I'm sorry, I can only give you 2. So figure out how you can do what you want to do with 2.
And so sometimes some adjustment needs to be made, or we'll figure out how to make that work. Compromise and creativity thrives under restrictions. I feel sometimes
the budgeting process for this stuff is tough. Eve's been doing it for several years now. She has a tremendous hold on it. She has a great knack for economically giving us what we need and finding ways even to save money at times, which is awesome. But it costs money to hire actors and a studio, and we have a company that sort of runs the process for us called Limelight, and we get our directors through them. We hire our studio engineers through them, and all of those. Plus, we have to go down, right? Several of us have to be in the room.
So we've jumped a couple of steps here.
Okay, sorry.
And huge thank you to Blindlight, by the way.
Yes.
I wanted to get that in.
Totally.
So let's back up to the steps
Table
that
reads.
table reads.
So once we've hit editing pass, or once we've hit the handoff to editing does a proofreading pass, and then we get into table reads where the narrative team, Loc, designers, audio team, we all sit in a room and read it out loud. We make sure that the script is exactly as we want it, that it's easy to say, that it's not people tripping over difficult words, because if we're tripping over the words in the table reads, maybe the actors will trip over it in the studio. So we think about, can we rewrite this line slightly because it's difficult to say.
You mentioned localization being a part of the process, and that was kind of recent, so I wanted to touch on that.
Yep. We started bringing localization into the table reads so that they could get the context of everything that's going on in the episode, and how things fit together, so they could start thinking about how they would translate things. We were getting comments from them that it's nice to, coming from a Loc background myself, it's nice to hear them say, like, you called out, for example, s'mores in a line. We don't have s'mores in Spain. So, how would we do that?
How do we,
I know, right?
I'm sorry, that's distracting.
So you have to think about the line, speaking on a Loc side here, you have to think about...
Localization, by the way, in case anybody doesn't realize.
Loc is localization.
We have to translate into other languages.
And so you wouldn't specifically just say s'mores and hope that your players can figure it out. You might think of, what's a dessert that's kind of like it that I can substitute here that still makes the line make sense.
Wow. Yeah. I had no idea. And I'm thinking back, like when we're doing blog posts on our side and we're talking about that, a lot of times there'll be a pun or something. And that's a question. Does this pun translate?
Absolutely.
But
we
that.
Want them to adapt rather than translate directly.
Right.
We want it to, like our goal is not that it be a literal translation. into the languages that we do localize into, but rather that it's a similar kind of experience, right? So as you said, I mean, sometimes that means finding an analog for something rather than just the exact same what the word means in Spanish or whatever.
All right, we have a crusade to bring
sorry about
s'mores to Spain now. I'm sorry, that's
Yeah.
incredibly distracting to me because it's just those little things that you wouldn't think of.
Yep.
And it's so ingrained in your culture that you don't think about the perspective from the other culture until they start bringing things up to you. But we've gotten localization into the table reads. So they can see the context. They can ask us questions.
And now
so
they're
that we
having their
can-
own table reads
yeah.
afterwards.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
That's
in their own
awesome.
languages.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
We've worked on that process, and we're working to make it even better. After the table reads, we get our changes in. We pass our scripts on to Blind Light. Blind Light, books all of our actors and our studio time. They're our vendor. And then there's the time in Burbank. So we fly down and we sit in the studio with the actors and the directors and the sound engineers, giving them the context, giving them the background, explaining the scene, what's going on.
Sometimes, occasionally, rewriting things on the fly,
Yep.
which, and very occasionally, you're writing things upon request from up here. We try to have one VO specialist, which is right now either Eve or Marissa, and one writing sort of representative, which most of the time is me. If we're running two studios, then it could be Jessica Price, or it could be Armin Constantine, or it could be if it's not one of them already, the writer who played the most prominent role on the episode. We usually have about 4 or 5 writers all told getting their hands on any given episode. So one person originates the early drafts of stuff, whether it's Golden Path, whether it's Open World, whether it's non-VO text, and also Raids and Fractals and stuff like that. Events like one that's coming. But so by the time it gets to the studio, it's had hopefully the best contributions of everyone who was around contributing to making it better. And plus I've seen it and we worked there. When I started here, there would be things that would not get past me, not get in front of me until we got into the studio, which is a very frustrating experience. Yeah, because that's not the time you want to introduce any kind of randomness or disorder in the process. But we're getting pretty good at this point at buttoning most of that up. Just so that I can make sure that everything is to the quality bar that we're sort of aiming for, right?
Well, and I wish we can't show call sheets right now because they're super spoilery.
True.
But how specific the call sheets are, and like you were saying, how buttoned down that process is. We go in there and it's this actor, here is the 3 people that she's doing, and here are there are 33 lines, 87 lines, 9 lines. And I can see how throwing something in at the last second, by the way, can we just add 6 more lines onto that 3?
Right.
And sometimes it's a time crunch.
Right.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, because so the easiest thing to do is when we rewrite in the studio on the fly. So even though we've heard it out loud numerous times, maybe the actor's still stumbling on it and it's hard to say. Maybe we just hear it in their voice and we realize it doesn't work as well worded the way it is as we thought it should. Maybe not very often, but occasionally we may catch that there's a logic problem or something that's implied by the line that we hadn't thought of, and we have to change it so that we don't violate something else that's happened or something like that, right? Those changes, I mean, it's not super easy, but particularly if I have another writer in the room, and I can basically have them like do the grunt work on doing the rewrite and then showing it to me, we can get that done, and it's easy to sort of capture. What's harder is if we have, as we do, after the designer's been penciled down, after we've had our VO deadline and we've done our table reads, if stuff comes in very late. And people are like, oh, we have to change the thing. Now, they're always changing it for good reasons. They're changing it because they've gotten feedback that it can be better, or because they themselves have realized they can be better.
Right.
They're not really supposed to be changing it at that point, but we want to be flexible. We want to make the thing as good as it can be. And so, 3 days before we go down, 2 days before we go down, they'll send us an email and say, oh, can we please do this change with this thing? And we'll be like, okay, we'll do our best. The problem is, once we're in the studio, we're going 90 miles an hour, and everything is already organized so that all we have to do is do the next thing at every moment, right? And so we can forget those things. We can forget those kinds of late kind of impromptu changes, which makes us feel terrible, and then we have to figure out how to cover for it later. But it's a very intensive, as you found out. You know, I mean, you're sitting there for 8 or 9 hours a day.
It's 9 to 6
Oh
every
man,
day.
focusing so
Focused.
hard on everything you're hearing, and everybody's got a different job. And one of the things that I love about the folks that we work with right now, we tend to work with the same people. So, Mark De La Rosa is our main engineer.
Fuente.
Sorry?
De La Fuente.
De La Fuente, sorry.
Sorry.
Phil Bach and Chris Valle are our main directors.
They're awesome.
Kimber Rose Williams is one of our main script coordinators from Blind Light, and we also have Tommy and Clint and other people. And what's great is we've done it together enough times now that we all know our role perfectly, so that if someone has a question and asks it or makes a statement, they don't have to say who it's meant for, because the person who it's meant for knows that it's for their role and responds in whatever way is appropriate. And so there's a minimum of chaos in that way, which is kind of amazing to watch. It's almost balletic, I think.
It is,
Yeah.
and having that rapport built up over a period of years is
exactly
amazing. Because I was sitting here while you were talking, I was like mentally counting, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 8 people in the bigger studio, and they're focusing so hard on every single line to make sure the inflection, everything is perfect. And it is balletic is a really good, and we'll watch a little bit of that here in a little bit. We've got some video from that we can share, a very little bit, because again, it was so incredibly spoilery.
Yep.
All right, so we're down there, and do you guys want to talk a little bit about giving direction to the actors and how that works? And I mean, I know a lot of that is like Phil and Chris, but
yeah,
you guys have a huge hand in that.
So, you know, I'm a recovering child actor. And many years ago, I started at the age of 11 as a professional actor on stage and on film. And
later we'll stalk you, and I
and I mostly was done with that by the time I was through with college. But I became a director. I became a theater director, and then I went to film school and a filmmaker and screenwriter. But it does give me insight into the acting process, which is very helpful. One of the things that I know as both an actor and director is that actors, there are many different kinds of acting training and technique out there. Every actor has their own sort of vocabulary that they need you to be able to learn to speak to them in, to be able to give them direction in a way that will be meaningful for them. And so part of your job as a director is to learn what that vocabulary is for everybody and use it. And I've had, like, my favorite example I like to give is one woman who was auditioning for a film that I made, told me in the audition that she was taking painting lessons, and she asked if maybe I could give her direction in sort of visual art terms. And I was like, I'm not sure what that really means, but I'll give it a shot. And so I was like, she'd do a line, and I'd say, can you give me a little more scarlet in that? And she would make an adjustment, and it really was what I was wanting.
That's adorable.
Oh, it was incredible. It was incredible. Now, that's an extreme example, obviously, right?
I'm so glad you told that story. That's it.
That's a more beautiful.
Yes,
because I'm thinking
not
of like the
always that
direction we
pretty.
do in the studio.
Well, I'm thinking back. I'm remembering last week there was an actor, and I'm like scared to even say who it was, but there was something generically bad going to happen to this actor, and we talked later. And she came out of the studio looking a little stunned, and she was like, "They asked me if I was interested in method acting." And I was like, "I'm sorry, they didn't do that to you, right?" And she was like, "No, but they asked."
Yeah.
And I can tell you more about that later.
Yeah.
Well,
But
and
yeah,
different
it was the
directors
same-
have different approaches too, right?
Yeah.
Like Phil's a bit methody in his.
It was Phil, in case you were wondering.
And Chris, much like me when I actually direct, is a little less that way. Is a little more outside in, as the Brits would say. But it is important too, in a general sense. You want notes always, whether they're notes coming to a writer during the development process or whether they're notes to an actor in the studio. You want those notes to be coming from one place, because it can be confusing if they're not. Because of the fact that many of our actors have been working with us for so long, and know all of us so well. We fudge that a bit sometimes. Sometimes Phil and Chris will go ahead and let them hear directly from me or from Eve or from Marissa or whoever else because it just saves time. And they have confidence that we're not going to say something that's going to randomize the actor entirely.
Right.
You know, so we try to keep as orderly as we can.
Just remembering, like, one of Phil's favorite directions is, okay, you're talking to the villain, so be defiant. And then they'll give the line and he goes, bigger middle finger.
Right. That's good.
That's perfect. I love it. You were talking about you directly sometimes giving the actor direction, and I want you to tell the story about how you had to do that last week.
Okay.
Because it is an awesome story.
Oh. Excellent. I haven't heard this. I can't wait.
You haven't?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, I
Yes,
thought
you
you were in
have.
the room for this.
Who are we talking about?
EK.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. Oh,
You were right
that
there.
story, yes. Well, I was
Yeah.
confused because she wasn't actually even in the room.
Yeah.
She was sending me emails.
I
waited
wasn't.
till
I
you
wasn't. I
left.
wasn't.
Right.
Yeah. So
Tom's in the bathroom. Go.
so
She was in the other studio.
yeah. How far back do we start this?
So we have,
Yeah.
well, we could say we have
We have a
Gorick,
character. Yep. We have
right?
the character of Gorick,
who's played by Ike
played by
Amati.
Ike Amati. Yep.
Who's incredible.
He is
Fantastic.
fantastic actor, Ike Amati.
Oh, man.
When we originally cast him for Gorick, I wanted to make sure, as we were getting more named characters, I wanted to make sure we got more actors of color because into our named characters, not just playing generics.
Right.
And so Ike's name came up, and I thought he could do an awesome Asura. I've worked with him a few times. He was.
He's
he
got
was
this
in the-
deep
yeah,
bass
he's
voice,
got
like
this
you would
deep
never
bass
think you would be
voice,
Asura, but
I
but
first
he's got
heard
this
him as
great range.
Gorick.
Yeah. And you're
And so-
surprised, I'm sure,
yeah.
by his regular
I was stunned when he started normally talking.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah.
Carry
no,
on.
no, this is fine. Because he's amazing. So I was like, I think he can nail this voice. We got him into the studio, and he nailed this Asura voice for
He's so
Gorick
good.
for episode 2. And then as Tom and I were talking between episode 2 and episode 3 development, Tom said, I want Gorick to be on the spectrum.
Was
And
I the one who said that?
You told me, that you had already that you had seen him as being on the spectrum.
Oh, okay.
From the start.
I didn't remember that was me who originated that idea, but that's cool.
In-
Yeah,
in that particular conversation,
okay.
you told me
okay.
that.
Because there was, I mean, the thing was, there wasn't that much Gorick dialogue in 2, right? They
Right.
only show up, he and Blish at the end. And so he gets talked about a bit, but there wasn't that much. And but in 3, not to get too much into it, but there's more Gorick in 3. And
Could you see my eyes getting huge? I know he knows what he's doing.
Yep.
I trust him.
Yep.
And then stuff happens.
And so the character evolves, right? I mean, we learn more. What I should say is we learn more about the character
Right.
as we're writing more of them, and I think it did become originally. Timey in episode 2 had lines about Gorick that were sort of like he's really kind of weird and annoying and like all this kind of stuff, and I didn't like my note to the writer about that stuff was let's not do that. Let's not tell the player what to think about this person. Let's write the character, and so we backed off some of that a bit, but I guess it must have occurred to me at some point that actually the things that people were perceiving as odd about him actually could be reframed as him not being a jerk, but rather him not being fully aware at all times of social cues, of how he's coming off. And yeah, I mean that started to sound like someone who's on the spectrum to me. I am not an expert in that though, and Eve is. Because she's on the spectrum, and so that's why Eve was like super resource for this.
Yeah, we're sitting having this conversation, and I was so excited. I'm like, yes, I want this to happen because more representation is great, and and being on the spectrum myself, I could be like, let's do this, and I want to have good representation for this. So we talked about it a little bit, getting during the development for episode 3, and when we got down to Burbank for episode 3, I said, do we want to lean into this on the performance? Do we absolutely want to make sure that this comes through in the performance? And Tom said, yes, let's do it. We're committed to this, which made me very happy. So when Gorick's actor came in, Ike came in, I was supposed to be in the other studio, working with Matt Mercer that day, and I, politely told Matt, I'm sorry, I have something I need to do for a few minutes. This is something I need to do, and I can't just hand it off to somebody else, but we're going to start a few minutes late. And he was like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem.
Well, given that he's the sweetest
Yeah.
dude on the planet.
He is,
very
yeah.
sweet.
So sweet.
And a real pro. He could get through the
Yeah.
PC lines.
Oh, he could nail it. Yeah. But I was like, we're going to start a few minutes late just so you know I have to run over to the other room for a minute. And I, found EK and said, okay, this is what we're doing with your character. Goric is on the spectrum. And since I am on the spectrum, I want to give you a few notes about how that performance would come through, how he would sound a little bit different. Without being like, you must read the line like this, because he's a professional. He knows how to do it, but I just wanted to give him that little background.
Very verboten, by the way, to give actors actual line readings, unless they tell you to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I said, being on the spectrum, it's, we're not emotionless robots. We're not, just like going to be angry or flat all the time. It's more that we don't pick up on social cues. We don't realize that there is hidden meaning to what we say, or subtext to what we say, or what other people are saying. So it may take you a moment, a few brain cycles to get to that before you go, oh yeah, okay, I get it now. And you're going to be focused on things because it's something that you're excited about, but not. And that can kind of make you oblivious to what's going on around you if you get really excited about something. Or, if you're upset about something, it's going to come through, but you may not realize that the words you are saying can be read a different way by somebody else in the room until they react, and then you go, oh, whoops.
Yeah.
About
Why is he
that.
acting like
Yeah.
that? That's odd.
So I gave him that note, and I said, I really appreciate you doing this, and now I have to run, and just kind of like threw that in his lap and ran off. But he is amazing. He nailed it. I think it probably helped in a way that I wasn't there for all of it to kind of
but so like I said, I mean, what she was doing though, and it was helpful because Eve was working with Matt on a PC script.
Yep.
We were working with EK on Goric, and we were moving through the script at roughly the same pace. So Eve would send emails because she would see a line coming up and say, tell him this, this, and this as sort of the subtext for it. And she would be almost really reliably by about 2 or 3 minutes ahead of us.
Oh, wow.
So that I could be prepared to actually,
Coordinate it,
and I would read him the email. And, thing to understand about both dramatic writing and acting from a craft perspective, both of them are really all about subtext. And in games, this is a thing that gets forgotten all the time. But most of the time in games, you don't even subtext is not a thing people even are thinking about. But for us, it is. For us, it's important for us to focus on it because it's the thing that gives words actual meaning, right? So you can have a line as an actor that was written for you, which you can interpret any number of ways and say any number of ways. Sometimes you can say it in a way that makes clear that the meaning that you're, transmitting is virtually 180 degrees opposite of what the text actually seems to say, right? So EK is an amazingly skilled and an agile actor, and I would read him these emails that Eve was sending. And whereas his first read, if we'd already done a take of the line, might have been, like, say the line could be read in a way which makes it seem like, one interpretation is Goric is being callous, right? And focusing on the thing that he cares about, the science thing, whatever it is, rather than the thing that's dramatic that's happening in the room that everybody else in the room is thinking about, right? So you could play it as just he's a callous kind of creep, and occasionally that might be some of that might be the first take that would come out of EK, and then I would read him the emails that Eve would send, and he would think about it for a second, and he'd go, okay, and you could see the minute calibrations going on in his head, and suddenly he would do the line again in a way that made it clear that Goric simply wasn't aware, that he couldn't perceive what everybody else was perceiving, and that if they call him on it, which at times they may, he's genuinely confused and sorry, contrite. He doesn't mean to be offensive, right?
he's not callous.
No,
He's
no,
not
no.
hateful
He's
or
a sweet
cold.
guy, actually,
Yeah.
right? Who gets misunderstood because of the Spectrum stuff. And EK would make the most amazing adjustments to dial that in very specifically. And I told Eve when we were, each time he'd do it, I'd write her back and I'd say, "Oh, I think you're really going to like what he did here." And when she listened to it, she was like, "Oh yeah, he nailed it completely."
Yeah,
I mean, we're
absolutely.
really excited
Just-
for people to hear that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
There's an interview with EK that we will air later, and I had told not later today.
still
I'm
haven't
sorry.
seen
Oh,
I know. I need to find it for you. I'm still sorting through files because there are literally 600 or 700 files. I'm working on it.
Yeah, there was a
But-
lot going on. I mean,
I was telling Eve that when I talked to EK later, one of the things that I was asking him was, tell me about that challenge and portraying a character on the spectrum. And he said, I had so much help. And he said it was you and you conveying it that made this work for him.
Yeah.
So it was that, and that's an extreme example. Excuse me, and there goes my voice.
Yeah.
So we're done here.
So I've been grabbing my water
Yeah.
myself.
That's an extreme example, but giving that direction, like you said, helps them dial it in very, very specifically
Yep.
without giving line reads.
Yeah.
I hadn't considered giving line reads, but it's good to know that it's
It's
a bad thing to do.
Yeah.
That's what a director who doesn't know what they're doing will do, and the actor will generally find it offensive. Just in the same way that a director will find it offensive if a screenwriter writes shot descriptions overtly, explicitly into a screenplay. Yeah, because you're stepping on somebody else's professional toes.
Yeah.
They have a job to do. There's an area that is theirs. You need to give them room to do their job.
It's like if I looked at you, Ruby, and I said, "Well, you need to write this forum post like this." What do I know?
Right.
I'm not a community manager. Why should I be
this
giving you
immediately.
exactly?
Okay,
Excuse me,
this,
why should I
in
be
that
giving you
context,
direction?
it's
Yeah.
very helpful.
You're the professional. I give you the slight notes about what I need out of you, and then
And you do it.
step
Which
back
is
and
why
let
I
you
don't come
let you do
stomping
your
into
magic.
the editing pod and
Right.
telling you, hey.
Exactly. Professional respect. That's what we're
Yes,
talking
that is an interesting point. It's something I've not had a reason to think about before, but when you,
Yeah, well, and I mean, to be frank, we're sensitive to it because I don't think it will come as a surprise to anybody that a lot of times what we do looks deceptively easy to people. They figure I watch stories in movies and then read and play games, and I write emails and stuff, and how hard can writing be? You're just making stuff up, right?
you said just, and that's exactly it in a
Yeah.
nutshell right
Yeah.
there. Why don't you just?
Yeah. And it's let's just say that's not the case. We may not like work in a different language like code or whatever, but there are a huge number of skills that are required for one to be proficient in to do what we do well. So
Well, and just going through the process here, I think, gives a good example. I mean, and we're not even done. This is just getting it recorded.
That's
it's still
right.
not even
Yeah.
in the game.
Yep.
All right, so we get all of that.
Yeah.
We bring it back here, apparently in a handbag, or he was telling me about handbags.
handbags.
That's right, you thought
And
it was
and
handbag.
I messed up the pronunciation or something. It sounded like handbags.
And if it is a thing that you carry in, and I was just baffled, like there's so much jargon I don't know.
No, it's
Handbags.
Yeah, we get handbacks of polished, cut, named files, which I then use to import into our tool and then run processing on. So for a couple of weeks, the audio that our devs, our designers, our QA team are listening to sound like just the actor's performance. The char don't sound like char; they sound like
Right.
the regular actors. While I get everything together and run the processing and get it re-imported.
and the processing basically does what?
The processing pitches, for the chart, pitches it down and adds those mouth noises that come from
like
having
and
cat
the rougher
face.
yeah.
Yeah, and the rougher tones.
She's not wrong.
No, she's not.
I mean, Drew on the audio team made these processes. I just push a button for that part. For that part, I mean, I do a lot of stuff over there, but when it comes to the processes, I push a button and let Drew's magic run.
So who does and does it? What races do and do not get processing?
Char and Norn get processing.
Down.
Yeah, pitch down, and for the char, additional textures added. The Awaken get processing. Joko gets processing. Ghosts get processing.
Cost, I think, right?
Yeah, Koss gets processing because he's an Awakened.
I had this panic moment trying to remember if we had introduced Koss yet.
No, we had. I did that in my head before I
We did
said
that,
it. Yeah, he was in episode 1.
Yeah, and But like Asura, Sylvari, Human, those are just the straight actor performances. None of those
Okay.
are
Which
changed.
surprised me, actually. I assumed Asura were
I did
pitched
too.
up.
That's
Yeah.
all right.
But that's
the
just the
actor.
actors.
Yeah.
And yeah, I didn't think about Joko. I mean, Nolan North is good, but
Yeah, when he comes, like the unprocessed Nolan North as Joko sounds basically like this. It's about this pitch,
which
right?
is amusing. And
Right,
all,
right,
but-
totally, very funny, very arch, sort of. I like to
Yeah.
describe him as a cross between Q from Star Trek: The Next Generation and King George III from Hamilton. But then of course he gets processed, and there's a whole dimension down here that gets added to it, so it's much fuller and
Yeah, it's a little scarier.
Yeah.
It's how we can have Nolan as the player, human male, PC human male, talking to Nolan as Palawa Joko without it being really obvious
You
that
won't
he's
know
having
the
a
difference.
conversation
That's
with
right.
himself.
Yeah.
Or as Mordremoth.
That's right. Yeah, those, like I said, there are actors that, you know, they're not a dime a dozen for sure, but there are voiceover actors who have so much range that they can do what we call A/B. A scene, which is play two characters a scene and you don't know it's the same actor, or even some of them, and Nolan is one of these, can ABC a scene.
Jeez.
And have three characters and you don't know it's all the same one. It's amazing to watch them do what they do. It's a very specific set of skills actor-wise. And similarly to what I said a few minutes ago about narrative, I think I think voiceover actors and those of us who work with them sometimes get a bit put out at the way in which big name like animated movies and stuff will take big name stars as voices for things who maybe don't have any voiceover experience at all, and sometimes it works out fine, but sometimes it doesn't, because the skills needed to give an effective performance on camera are not the same skills as those needed to give an effective performance that is all in your voice. In other words, you can't rely on face, body language, anything, any kind of physicality. It's got to all be put into this, right? And that is not easy. It's a very elite set of skills that these people have.
Well, and it's hard on their voices too. I mean, you're
Oh, yeah.
taking breaks. You're making sure that.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's a
We'll
lot of-
delay like screams or combat stuff if we have any to the end, so that we don't blow them out early.
We fortunately we don't have as much screaming as some other games do.
It's such a great
Yeah,
quote right there.
We don't have as much screaming or shouting as other games do. So it's not a huge portion of their performance, but we'll still delay it to the end so that they're not trying to, scream and then whisper,
Yeah.
because then you can hear it in the whisper afterwards that, their voice has taken some strain.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so we get all the processing done, and then you just stick it in game, and it's over.
Done.
Wrong.
Ship
We skipped
Yeah.
over doing temp VO for cinematics, which sometimes even I drop in lines for cinematics.
Yeah.
We have to do cinematics an episode ahead of time, so we will record them. Like cinematics for episode 4, we actually recorded with episode 3 this time. But the cinematics folks need more lead time than that because it takes them a long time to do stuff. So sometimes even I and Jessica and whoever will hop in the booth and give them really terrible temp VO to try to work with. But so at this point then, the VO is in the game, it's implemented. But it's just, I mean, the best way I can express it is it's kind of just been tossed in the general place where it's supposed to be, right? And we don't want it in general place. We want it to be tight. We want it to have good timing. We want things that are funny to be timed properly so that they will make you laugh. We want things that are scary to be timed properly so that they will make you afraid, etc. And so at that point, one of the writers will sit down, usually the principal Golden Path writer, will sit down and play through and listen to the way the dialogue is firing and move it, sometimes in minute, bits of seconds, one direction or the other, earlier or later, until it sort of plays the way that we want it to. Editing is both visual editing and sound editing are aspects of an entertainment experience that people maybe aren't always aware of what an incredibly huge impact they have on things. But if you have a sequence where you have a bunch of lines that are not, where nobody's really taken a hand to trying to place them properly, it can feel very slack, like there's no energy in the thing. Conversely, once somebody's gone in and adjusted that stuff, and it feels tight and snappy and like there aren't a lot of pauses or dead time and that kind of thing. It just, the energy returns and fills up the experience, and it's really cool. So they'll do that, and then they'll usually like collect the big narrative moments, and they'll sit down with me and show those to me, and I'll give them any feedback that I may have on it, so that improves the timing of everything.
And we're focusing entirely on English here at the moment.
Oh my
because
gosh, right.
Loke is running in parallel with us.
And they can't start
yeah.
at each stage until after we've done ours.
So once I've handed the scripts off to Blindlight, which is backing up a little bit in the process, I also hand the scripts off to Loke, who passes them off to their localization partners in Europe, where they record. I believe French is recorded in Paris, German is recorded in Hamburg. And I'm not entirely sure where our Chinese VO is recorded. I apologize.
You still know more than we do. So,
but they pass it off to their studios for translation. We get queries back and forth. Like,
what are s'mores?
What are s'mores? What is this in context to? Can you give me a little bit more information about this? If we use a turn of phrase that's a little bizarre to them, idiomatic, they'll ask us about it, and we try and explain it so that they can get the best translation into their language, so that it makes the most sense in their language. And then
and this if I
sure.
may, I just want to say this is an area that we're working really hard right now. We talked a little about it before, to improve, because at some point we realized that half our players play this game in a language other than English, and that we had virtually no visibility into what was going on with that, right? And that's not to impugn the folks that we have here who work on Loke, because they're terrific. But we realized that in talking to Bashkim, who's the head of the Loke team, we realized that the best way to ensure that the narrative experience for players in other languages was at the same standard as what we want it to be for English, since we don't speak those languages, was to actually invite the Loke team to assimilate more into us, into our team, so that they don't necessarily have to ask so many questions about context, because they've been there for table reads. They've seen scripts. They know, they have a sense themselves of what some of the answers to those questions are. And it's fairly early in our attempt to do that. But I think already, my sense at least, is that it's had a wonderful effect. I know the Loke team loves it. And as we've said, they're starting to adopt some parts of our process and do them themselves for their process in their languages. And, it's just, we need to make sure that we're always trying to get the best possible experience for players that we possibly can. And this was an area where we could make improvements, and we are.
Well, and that makes me go back to what you were saying about adding VO lines while you're already down in Burbank in the studio. It's a ton more efficient if you get this done earlier in the process, and everything is ironed out and everybody knows what's going on.
Yep, because if not, then Eva Marissa has to make sure that they catch all of those things and then give them to Loke and say, here are changes, here are things.
Surprise!
Yep, exactly.
By the way, redo all that work.
Yes, which Loke loves.
Why are you crying?
Yes.
Yeah, they love it as much as we love it, having it handed to us.
Once we have our English audio handbacks of the actor performances, not the process, but the actor performances, I pass those on for Loke to pass along to their studios. They use them as guide tracks.
Okay.
So they can, since we don't always have representation in the studio, they can listen to the English and be like, oh, this one's supposed to be angry, this one's in combat. They can get that extra context right from the English performance, so that they can have their content or their VO ready, and that gets imported after the English, another processing pass, timing, QA, all of that fun stuff.
So this can only raise the quality.
Yes.
Well, that we hope. And we've also told them, a lot of animated things, when they get localized into other parts of the world, they go to great lengths to find a voice that sounds a lot like the voice in the original language or whatever. And one thing we've been clear on is, let's not do that. You guys cast the best actors. Your Timey does not have to sound like Debbie Derryberry. I'm not sure anybody in the world sounds like Debbie Derryberry.
I was wondering. Are there two of those? Because that's a gift,
right?
They can use it. They can use it as a guide, but it doesn't have to be an exact.
Exactly. You don't have to be slavishly bound to it, right? Find the right actor for the role in your language and run with it.
The thing that pops into my mind at this moment is Kingdom Hearts in Japanese, because my background in localization is in Japanese to English localization, and listening to Kingdom Hearts, Donald Duck in Japanese sounds like Donald Duck in English. Like
Whoa,
they got
seriously?
somebody to do the voice, and it's almost unintelligible because
Wow.
he's got that weird
Yeah,
Donald
that
Duck
Donald Duck
voice.
voice.
I mean, he's almost unintelligible in English, and then
yeah.
you put it in another language.
Oh gosh. Oh.
I mean, that's Disney's call. That's not mine. But it's just
Yes.
an example of like slavishly
Wow.
sticking to a performance and making sure it's exactly the same in all languages.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that isn't the best way to do it.
Wow.
So.
I need to hear this at some point. Well, I'll tell you
Google,
what. Why don't
YouTube,
we?
whatever.
We have a little bit of footage from our last VO session, and then I want to take some questions. If
Okay.
you guys are still up for that, please don't change your mics. I already told them yes. I do have one question that I noticed yesterday that I didn't have a good answer for. We've covered a little bit, but somebody was asking if we always have recorded our VO in Burbank, in English.
Yeah, in English, to my knowledge.
And there
yes.
have been a couple times where actors couldn't make it in.
Right. I guess I should say we've been centered in Burbank for all of our recordings, but we have had a few instances where an actor was elsewhere in the world on set for something that they needed to remote in and record. We've had actors remote in from Austin, from New York, and from Budapest, Hungary as
Wow,
well.
really?
Yeah, that was weird because of the time change. So
Who was that?
that was
Do you
Ron Yuan, our previous PC
Okay,
Char
yeah,
Mail.
yeah,
He was filming Marco Polo during Heart of Thorns recording,
Oh, wow.
and so we had to get 2 sessions with him from Hungary remotely. So he was in a studio in Hungary where we were getting the audio, and then I was Skyped in. There was, because of the 9-hour time difference at the time, it was here in the U.S. in Pacific time, it was a 9 to 1 session, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. session, and then a midnight to 4 a.m. session,
Oh.
which he had sleep in between, but I had a nap.
I was like, oh, my gosh. Okay. Well, cool. That's interesting. I'll tell you what. Why don't we take a look at our VO footage, and then we'll let you guys answer some questions from people watching.
All right.
All right. We'll be right
Sounds
back.
good.
That's enough of that. That's enough of that.
Here, B, both agree. This next one, this is like the cops are going to figure out what to do with you. So this whole thing is like, don't go anywhere, like stay here, the cops are coming.
Right. I'll deal with it. Don't go anywhere. The Sunspears will decide what to do with you.
Now I'm liking where this is, but now just to save you more, separate out those sentences.
Okay. I'll deal with it. Don't go anywhere. The Sunspears will decide what to do with you.
Or more like it. By the way, that breath in between 2 and 3, that stuff's good.
Okay.
Keep that in there.
All right. I'll deal with it. Don't go anywhere. The Sunspears will decide what to do with you.
I don't get that last line.
Here's why.
Yeah.
And so someone's like, oh no, and this is what you say?
Quiet. What if he hears you? Quiet. What if he hears you?
Nice. One more for me. You had it right there. But the idea of this is kind of dual. It's like you're saying yes, absolutely not, but then also you're kind of reassuring yourself because that idea for you is equally terrifying. So here we go. One more on C.
Indubitably. Indubitably.
Nice, all good stuff. Semi. So let me hear the B and D back to back.
Indubitably. Indubitably.
Hear the A.
As you can see, this is just pre-recorded for here.
Access denied. Access denied.
Keep her B.
I like B.
Next one here on our 5.
Access granted. Access granted.
Keep her B, both agree.
Can we get, sorry, I swear I had a note about this and it apparently didn't make it in. Can we get a alt for line 3 where you just kind of giggle a little? Like you've personally programmed this in, maybe you're having a little bit of fun with it.
Sure.
Take 6.
Access denied.
Even a tighter giggle for nailed it.
Access denied.
Sweet.
That's an alt.
Tell him to sit tight.
Nice, I like that. I slowed down just a bit in the sense of you don't know, you know he's a bumbling idiot and you don't want him to get hurt and you're kind of like, I don't know what to do yet.
Tell him to sit tight.
Nice. I'll keep the secret.
Gross. Me too. Gross. Me too. Gross.
Oh, that last is great. Can I hear the last again?
I think the words you're looking for are, thank you. I think the words you're looking for are, thank you.
I love watching them emote as they're
Yep.
they're doing this.
Yep. Oh, and I want to say the engineer, because I didn't mention her name before. The engineer in that last shot was Bree. She's the other engineer. She's terrific. Yeah.
Yeah, the Blind Light crew is amazing. They are all so good. All right, so why don't you guys take some of these questions and knock these out?
Okay. So, someone who's definitely not Corey from Blind Light says, is there an influence from real life situations in Guild Wars, or is it imaginative fantasy? Do we have to choose? I mean, really, I think it's actually both, for sure. So here's the thing. I think anyway, if you want to make genre material like fantasy or science fiction really come to life, it has to be first and foremost about real people. It has to, and those people can be robots, or they can, or golems, or whatever. Right? I mean, I'm using people in a very broad sense, but like I said before, story comes from character. Story comes from the fact that every character, because it's true of everyone in the world, has things that they want, and acting that's called objectives, and things that they need, and there's generally, if you're doing it right, there's a difference between those two things. And the difference between those two things, what you need and what you want, is the thing that creates conflict within the character and sometimes conflict without the character, and creates the sort of thing that the story is about. Now, in that sense, that's real world psychology, for sure. That is, so our characters, we very much think about them in those terms. We're also absolutely influenced by things that go on in the real world. I'm talking about, when we make video games in general, broadly. And those things will have an impact. And I think there are times when stuff that we're talking about, writers especially, will talk to each other in a shorthand, often of references to actual things, or occasionally to other stories, because we know sort of what that means. So if we say, something like, oh, it's a Rapunzel situation, then the other person will know immediately you're talking about someone who's stuck in a place that they can't get out of, and by someone who's supposed to love them or something like that. And we've definitely done that with this stuff. I mean, for example, the best one I can think of is the situation in Alona with Joko, and his having sort of had his bony foot on the throat of the entire area for quite some time at this point. As of episode 2, we've got Sunspears who are now fighting back against him, and are trying to retake parts of that, and deal with the people who live there who are starving and have no water and stuff, because Joko is sort of like Kim Jong-un and cuts off resources to his own people. And the Sunspears, and I actually use this terminology at times in talking to both writers and actors about it, very much I think at times are reminiscent of our allied military forces in places like Afghanistan, where they're there to work with a population that maybe doesn't trust them entirely, or that certainly at least is beleaguered, and I think we're all unfortunately familiar from the last 17 years of what those kinds of environments look like, what the dynamics of those situations are. We've seen them on the news so many times, and so it's very easy to use that as an analog and turn to an actor and say, this is sort of what you're doing there, and they go, okay, great, I got it.
Got
it. So it's, I mean, we use it for inspiration, but we also use it as a shorthand way to communicate about the work itself,
because everyone has that context.
Yep.
Yes. Awesome. All right, what else?
Are you down?
Yep. Do you guys get all excited when certain voice actors show up? We get excited for everybody.
We do. We love our cast. They're amazing.
Yeah, our cast is amazing.
We get to see
It's
them every couple of
always
months, and
great,
it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's always great having all of them in the booth, and so it's a joy when they walk in. Just like, yay, they're here.
It's really fun.
Yep. And some of them we will sometimes. Some of them will go out with us in the evenings. We'll have dinner together. We go do karaoke together sometimes. We have a great relationship with them, and some of them, because even I've both been doing this quite some time. Some of them we've known for 10, 15. Jocelyn Blue I've known for 20 years I think, maybe ish or almost, before I even knew she was a voice actor. So that's a great part of our work life for sure.
I worked with Yuri Lowenthal and Steve Bloom and Nolan North on my first voice acting project back in 2005 at a translation company I worked at in Tokyo.
Crazy.
And so when we came down once for Guild Wars, and I got to run into Yuri for the first time in like 10 years. He's like, "Oh my gosh, you're here! Holy cow! Hadn't thought I'd see you again," sort of thing.
Yep.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
What else?
Maybe
8?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
So Ben Lubar says, wait, when did Nolan appear 3 times in one scene? To clarify, I didn't say he had. I said he appeared twice. He's going to appear, has appeared as himself as the human male PC and also as Joko. I don't know that he has appeared 3 times in a scene in something we've done, but he could is the thing. He's that good.
It's like if
it's a goal now.
Yeah.
If the PC was talking to Mordremoth and Joko at the same time, or
that would be a situation in which it could happen.
Yeah,
that would sure be a thing.
Blow
that
your
would
mind.
sure be a thing.
That's
Blow your
terrifying.
mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rain Artica says, did any of the ANET staff do some voice acting for random NPCs, or is everything from actors? So here's the thing. Since we are, which my camera, that one? Yeah.
Yes. This is YouTube.
So we are signatories, as are most of the game companies, if not all that you know about, to the contract that exists between the Screen Actors Guild and the major game companies. And part of what that contract says is that no one who is not a member of SAG can do voices in a video game made by a company that is signatory to it. So the answer to that is no. In the old days, in the Wild West, absolutely. Like on the first few games that I wrote on Destroy All Humans, the director Doug Kerrigan and I we would realize on the last day that there were little things we had missed and we needed to record, and there was nobody there but us. Unfortunately, we'd both been actors, so we just happened to do it.
Yeah.
But not allowed to do that anymore.
We do occasionally do scratch audio, but it does not leave this office. It does not make it into the live
And
game.
you wouldn't want it to.
Yeah. It's for dev purposes only, just so that there's something other than Robo Voice, or so for rough timing or that
Robo
kind of
Voice
thing.
is its own joy, but yes.
I'm personally, I'm not a fan of Robo Voice, but but if it works for people, that's cool.
Telos asked, do all the chore voices have processing? Female voices sound less. I don't know how to say it. Beastly, I believe. They sound cool, to be honest. The char male and female do have separate processes, so they get slightly different adjustments to their voice and pitches and things.
But the female char still does have processing.
Yes, the female char has processing.
Just
the male char
different.
has processing.
Okay.
It's just slightly different.
Yep.
Interesting.
Rizal says, when writers introduce new narrative in game assets, what are the type of discrepancies or challenges that designers have when collaborating with artists and programmers? How do designers introduce a new idea to be implemented and have the process developed with artists and programmers in general?
It's a very collaborative process.
It is a very
games,
collaborative process.
just in
That's
general.
right.
You have to work with a lot of people.
That's right. The writers and designers will be in contact frequently with art about assets that they're going to need for things they're doing, or new characters outfits or stuff like that. The process for the sort of writer-designer interaction, once we've done the story breaking that I talked about earlier, basically is that the designer, whereas the writer starts writing drafts, what the designer does, the designer starts building, in a sense, a draft of the chapter that they're going to make, and that means putting an environment together, placing props and characters in that environment, having characters do certain kinds of mechanical or movement oriented things to do what they want to do. And in terms of script, most of the time what happens is the designer, once we've got all of that stuff outlined, and that's why it's important to have it outlined so everybody knows what everybody's doing, the designer is essentially taking the first pass frequently at sort of dialogue that will go with gameplay, and they will give the writer what we call a stubbed in version of the script. And it could be, and frequently is, and probably should be, really limited. Like it's like, PC, where are you going? Timey, I have no idea, but like it's not supposed to be good. It's just supposed to be, it communicates in a clear enough way sort of what's in the designer's head about how they see the stuff that's in the outline kind of playing out in that moment. And the writer then will take that stubbed in conversation and iterate on it oftentimes a bunch, and it may bear very little resemblance at the end of the process to what it started out as, other than sort of getting the most important bits of information across that it's supposed to. But again, that's a back and forth constantly. This is the most. So I've worked in theater, I've worked in film and TV a little, and I've worked in games now for 20 years, and video games are without question the most collaborative art form. They make film look like a one-man show, which is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really like nothing happens. The idea of auteurism in video games is just ridiculous, because nothing happens without dozens, if not occasionally hundreds, of incredibly talented, skilled, experienced people bringing everything they've got to bear on the task that is their part of what they're doing, and therefore the communication between all of those different parts has to be frequent and regular and open for it to work.
I'm going to grab one here on the bottom. Denari Debet says, question, there's been some bits of voices talking over each other, like the Shining Blade Oath. How hard would it be to have the first bit of an interruption laid over the last bit of what's being interrupted, rather than the interruptee pausing as if cut off, but the other line waits a second to commence? That's one of those moments you don't realize how much architecture goes into that exact moment, because that's the game engine, the programming, telling which file to play when, what to do if a file gets cut off, how to time a file overlaid over another file. It's one of those things that you just think happens naturally because you do it in speech so much that you don't realize that there is a whole structure behind all of that in every game you play that dictates how the game engine handles it.
That goes back to what Tom was saying.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, about it seems deceptively easy.
Yeah.
And it can appear like, well, why don't you just tell him to say something a second sooner?
Mm-hmm.
And if I can do that and think, okay, I can have my actors deliver these lines as if, this person's being cut off, so cut yourself off in delivering this line, and, this line's going to play over top of it. But then I actually have to get into the game engine and tell it to make that adjustment. And depending on, which game engine you're building, I'm not specifically talking about Guild Wars, I'm talking about all games in general at this moment. The game engine itself and how it runs those files, it may have code that says stop playing an audio file, or it may have code that just says, no, this audio file plays until this audio file is done, and we don't know how to handle it any other way. And so, as a player, you don't realize that there's that much going on in the background for every second of every audio file that you hear.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we're trying another area we're trying to improve is our interaction with audio. This season, players have already seen in episodes 1 and 2 a number of moments that were basically a combination of narrative and design and audio came up with ideas for doing things with audio that would be really cool, that we haven't tried to do before. things like, for example, we have Joko speaking through characters, and in that specific instance that was referred to, speaking through like a room full of characters, right? So you hear their voices, and you have to hear Joko's voice, and we have to record all those people doing that, and we have to know about what we want the timing to be. So generally, we'll record Joko first in that situation. Then we get everybody else to kind of match the timing roughly, but not exactly, because we don't want it to be like, the stuff with Joko and Taimi over the comm in episode 1 in the middle at the prison, where you hear him killing and awakening people, and you hear her, reacting to that. I mean, was creating a whole. It was like an audio play, right? Creating a whole sort of soundscape that was going on. That hopefully, if we all did our jobs right, the idea was, like, it makes you crazy because you want so badly to intervene and you can't. There's nothing you can do. You don't even know where she is in the world, right? And so, I mean, audio loves getting opportunities to do that kind of stuff and really show what they're capable of. And so we're trying to keep pushing each episode and come up with more and more interesting things for them to do.
We're working. We bring the audio team in on the table reads as well, and discuss with them, like, this is a moment that we see coming up. Can you think about how we can do this? How we can, not just on the performance side, like the moment where Joko starts talking through the inquest to Sura, and I believe it was episode 1.
It's terrifying.
Or episode, I think it was episode 1. Yeah.
But he keeps doing it. I mean, he does it in every episode.
Where you're hearing these layered voices. Like on our end, we had Nolan do it first, and then we played the audio back as the other 4 voices were delivering those lines so that they could hear it and match the rough timing. But then we had to hand it off to the sound designer in the audio team to add more layers on top of that and processing on top of that to add, to make it that moment. Because it wasn't just the performance, it wasn't just dumping the file in the engine and hoping. It was making it work and building and adding all of this groundwork and layers of work and polish to make it that moment.
And again, I'd point out, we do this every 2.5 to 3 months. This kind of work goes into every single episode that comes out every 2.5 to 3 months, and there's nothing easy about it.
It is intense. Is it worth it?
Oh, totally.
Oh, heck yeah.
God, are you kidding? Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome.
Yes, it is. So, well, thank you guys very, very much. I appreciate you answering all the questions that you could.
Right. Yeah, and the ones we didn't answer mostly is because we'd already addressed them.
Yep.
So we looked at them for sure.
Yeah, it's not that we're mean.
Yeah.
Well, I will let you guys get back to work. Thank you so much for your time. This was really, really fascinating. There was a lot that I didn't know, even after talking to you about it earlier this week. So, and thank you guys very much for coming and hanging out with us today. We all appreciate it. If you want to read a little bit more from the lore side than the narrative process side, in our forums, the last ArenaNet forum chat was more on the narrative, more on the lore side.
That's right.
So check that out. And otherwise, we are good. And I will see you guys back here next week on Guild Chat. Thanks, guys.
Fear not this night.
Oh, that was so good.